Hi everyone, welcome to week 3. So this week we'll focus on the process of writing. We've encountered this term before. One of our threshold concepts that we read about in week 1 was this concept is that, quote, writing is a process, all writers have more to learn, and writing is not perfectible. I just want to briefly define process before we get started. In writing studies, we talk about writing in two different ways. We can talk about the product of writing and the process of writing. Just think about everything we've read so far this term, the textbook chapters we've been reading. Those are writing as product, right? All we see is the finished draft. What we don't see is like 99.9% of the iceberg, all of the work that went into it. We don't see the writer's outline. We don't see the free writing they did. We don't see the feedback they got from their editors. We don't see all the research they did to come up with this piece. We don't see the revisions they wrote, and then the feedback they got again, and then the last revision they wrote, and then the editing. All we see is the product. So it can be easy to just focus on writing as product. It can be easy to forget that there's all of this process going on under the surface. But in this class, we don't want to forget about that process. Everything we do to create a finished product counts as process. We'll use the term writing process and composing process sort of interchangeably. So you might think of that poster that was hanging maybe in your 3rd grade class that said the writing process. Step 1, do pre-writing. Step 2, do an outline. Step 3, write a draft. Step 4, get revision. Step 5, final draft. So that is a writing process, but there's so much more to it, right? So this week, I just want us to consider everything about our own writing or composing process. And I'm not just the steps. Often when we examine the writing process, it's usually more complicated than step 1, step 2, step 3. Often we'll say, go back and do more research, or we'll scrap something and start entirely from the beginning. So we just want to complicate that simplified notion a little bit. And another way to do that is just to pay attention to the material aspects of your writing process. For instance, what time do you like to write? What time do you start writing a piece? Do you give yourself enough time, or do you start 2 hours before the deadline? Time is something to consider. Do you write multiple drafts, or do you rely on the one draft wonder? Do you write in the morning? Do you write in the evening? Do you drink coffee or tea or beer or wine while you write? Do you snack? What do you snack on? Do you listen to music? Do you write in silence? Do you write at a desk, on a couch, in a library, where you write? We just want to get you reflecting on all of the aspects of your writing process. The point of all this, of course, is to reflect on your own individual writing choices, your process choices, right? We want you to pay attention to what works, identify what works well for you, what doesn't, in order to change anything that is unhelpful. Right, you might have heard the sort of colloquial phrase that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. Well, if you have a horrible experience writing essays and you start 2 hours before it's due and you're not satisfied with the product, you have a lot of anxiety about it, and the whole writing process is a very painful experience, and then the next time you have a piece due, you start 2 hours before the deadline again. That's what we want to avoid. We want to pay attention to what works well in our own individual writing process in order perhaps to expand upon parts of our process that work well for us, or refine, delete, change parts of our process that don't work well for us. So this week we'll read some advice from professional writers. We'll look at process theory in some ways. We'll get a look at their own personal writing process of the authors. But they're giving advice about how process works for them. And that's all we can call it here is advice, because no one can tell you what your correct writing process is. It's different for everyone. So our goal this week isn't to say, write this way. Our goal is for you to reflect on and address what works well for you in your process and what doesn't.